At my business launch party, my brother said, "This $1.2 million company should really belong to family." Then Dad added, "Time to share the wealth." I just smiled, pulled out my phone, and showed them the document that changed everything. Remember when you abandoned me at 19? I built this empire with nothing but determination. You know those moments when life hits you like a freight train, leaving you gasping for breath and questioning everything you thought you knew? For me, that moment came watching my older brother Marcus and our father William swagger into the launch party for my tech consulting firm, a company that represented every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every dollar I'd scraped together after they'd cast me aside like yesterday's garbage. The sick feeling in my stomach told me exactly what was coming, the same entitled look I'd seen 6 years ago when they decided I wasn't worth their time or money. But let me back up. This story doesn't start with my success. It starts with a broken family in Portland, Oregon, where appearances mattered more than reality, and where I learned early that love could be conditional, support could be withdrawn, and sometimes the people who are supposed to protect you are the ones who hurt you most. Growing up in Portland, Oregon, the Harrison family looked perfect from the outside. Dad ran a successful construction company called Harrison & Sons. Ironic, considering how he'd eventually treat his actual sons. Mom, Patricia, managed the family finances with an iron fist and maintained our pristine colonial house in the affluent Westmoreland neighborhood. We had the perfect lawn, the perfect cars in the driveway, and what everyone assumed was the perfect family dynamic. Marcus was 3 years older than me, the golden child who could do no wrong in anyone's eyes. He played varsity football, dated Sarah Morrison, the homecoming queen with the perfect smile and wealthy parents, and had already been accepted to Oregon State on a partial athletic scholarship by his senior year. Meanwhile, I was the quiet one, the bookworm who spent more time with computers than people, always living in my brother's considerable shadow. The neighborhood kids called me Jordan the Brain, but never included me in their activities. While Marcus threw legendary pool parties that had parents calling the police, I was in my bedroom, teaching myself programming languages and building computers from spare parts I'd bought with my allowance. Mom would shake her head and mutter about how I needed to be more social, more like Marcus. Dad would ruffle my hair absently and suggest I spend less time playing with toys and more time learning about real business. When I was 15, cracks started showing in our family foundation that no amount of fresh paint could hide. Mom discovered Dad's gambling problem when she found out he'd secretly mortgaged our house twice to cover his losses at the Alani Casino. The discovery came during what should have been a routine refinancing meeting with our bank. The loan officer mentioned the existing second mortgage, and Mom's face went white. She'd never authorized any second mortgage. That evening, the house erupted. The fights were explosive and constant, lasting deep into the night. I'd lie in bed, listening to them scream at each other through the thin walls, their voices carrying accusations of betrayal, financial ruin, and years of lies. Marcus sided with Dad immediately, claiming Mom was overreacting and that successful men take calculated risks. "He's building something bigger than what we have now," Marcus would argue during family dinners that had become battlegrounds. "You just don't understand business, Mom." I tried to stay invisible during these confrontations, focusing on my studies and my part-time job at Technofix, a local computer repair shop owned by an elderly Korean War veteran named Frank Kozlowski. Frank paid me $12 an hour, generous for a 15-year-old, and treated me with more respect than I got at home. He'd let me take apart broken computers to understand how they worked, and he'd share stories about how technology had evolved since his army days. Frank's shop became my refuge, the one place where my skills were valued and my opinions mattered. The divorce that followed was nasty, public, and devastating. Dad moved into a downtown apartment in the Pearl District, taking nothing but his clothes and leaving Mom to deal with the financial wreckage he'd created. The house went into foreclosure proceedings almost immediately. Mom, bitter and overwhelmed, began drinking heavily, starting with wine at dinner, then progressing to vodka hidden in coffee cups throughout the day. She worked 3 jobs to try keeping our house, her regular position at an accounting firm, weekend shifts at Nordstrom, and evening bookkeeping for small businesses. The stress aged her a decade in 6 months. Marcus, rather than helping with household responsibilities or supporting Mom through this crisis, seemed to blame her entirely for destroying our perfect family image. He started staying out all night, partying with his football teammates, and barely managed to graduate high school despite his athletic talents. His grades plummeted from B's to D's, but somehow his coaches and teachers kept passing him along. The golden child could do no wrong, even when he was clearly doing everything wrong. During this period, I became the de facto man of the house at 16. I grocery shopped with coupons, cooked dinner most nights, helped Mom with her bookkeeping clients when she was too drunk to manage numbers, and maintained our yard so the neighbors wouldn't gossip more than they already were. My grades never slipped, If anything, school became another escape, a place where hard work yielded predictable results. When Marcus turned 18, Dad emerged from his post-divorce exile with startling news. He had a new girlfriend named Tiffany Brookstone, a 26-year-old cocktail waitress at an upscale downtown restaurant called Le Bernardin. Tiffany had expensive tastes, perfectly styled blonde hair, and big dreams about opening her own event planning business. More shocking than Dad's rebound relationship was his apparent financial recovery. Suddenly, he was flush with cash again. Apparently, he'd been hiding assets during the divorce proceedings. The first sign of Dad's renewed wealth was the brand new Ford F-350 pickup truck he bought Marcus for graduation. Not used, not modest, a fully loaded truck worth $45,000. Along with the truck came a promise to pay for Marcus's entire college education, plus living expenses, plus a monthly allowance for miscellaneous expenses. Meanwhile, I was working 35 hours a week at Technofix while maintaining a 4.0 GPA, saving every penny for my own college fund, which had grown to about $8,000 over 2 years of relentless work. Marcus thrived in this new dynamic. He and Dad became drinking buddies, weekend warriors who went to sports bars to watch games and took trips to the casino together. They had season tickets to the Trailblazers and took expensive fishing excursions to Alaska, where they'd spend thousands of dollars on guides and equipment for what Dad called male bonding experiences. I wasn't invited to these adventures. Not that I particularly wanted to go, but the exclusion stung nonetheless. When I asked about it once, Dad said, "When you're ready to be a man instead of hiding behind computers, we'll talk." I told myself I didn't care. I had my own plans and dreams that didn't require their approval or financial support. At Technofix, Frank had started letting me handle more complex repairs and even some custom-build projects for his wealthiest clients. I was learning valuable skills and earning money that I controlled completely. But deep down, the favoritism burned. Watching my brother get everything handed to him while I worked for every opportunity felt profoundly unfair, though I was too proud to complain. The summer after my junior year of high school, everything seemed to be falling into place for my future. I applied for early admission to several prestigious computer science programs, including MIT, Stanford, Carnegie Mellon, and Caltech. My SAT scores were 1580 out of 1600, nearly perfect. My grades were immaculate. I had impressive recommendations from Frank, who'd written a detailed letter about my technical skills and work ethic, and from my AP computer science teacher, Mrs. Elizabeth Chen, who described me as the most naturally gifted programmer she'd encountered in 15 years of teaching. More importantly, I'd started developing something special. During lunch breaks at Technofix, I'd been working on a mobile application for project management specifically designed for small construction companies. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was creating exactly what Dad claimed he needed for Harrison & Sons. The app, which I called BuildTrack, allowed contractors to manage schedules, budgets, communications, and documentation all from their smartphones or tablets. It could track worker hours, monitor material costs, send automatic updates to clients, and generate professional invoices. I'd spent months researching the construction industry's pain points and interviewing Frank's contractor friends about their biggest frustrations. By December of my senior year, I'd received acceptance letters from all 4 universities, including MIT, with a partial merit scholarship that would cover 60% of my costs. Between my college savings and student loans, I could make it work, though it would be financially tight. I was hoping, naively as it turned out, that Dad might contribute something toward my education, especially since he'd been so generous with Marcus. I wasn't asking for $45,000 trucks or Alaskan fishing trips. I just wanted some acknowledgement that my achievements mattered, that my dreams were worth supporting. That's when everything went sideways in the most devastating way possible. My 19th birthday fell on a Thursday in June, just 2 weeks before high school graduation. It should have been a celebration. I was valedictorian, had been accepted to MIT, and had even received a small additional scholarship from the local Rotary Club. Instead, it became the night that changed everything. I came home from my shift at Technofix that evening to find Dad, Marcus, and Tiffany sitting around our old kitchen table, which had been cleared of its usual clutter and covered with papers and documents. Mom was notably absent, working her evening shift at the restaurant where she'd taken a third job. The atmosphere felt heavy, like the air before a thunderstorm. All 3 of them had serious expressions, and I noticed they'd been drinking. There was an open bottle of expensive whiskey on the counter, something Dad definitely couldn't afford before his mysterious financial recovery. "Sit down, Jordan," Dad said, his tone more formal than usual. "We need to discuss your college situation." I sat, immediately wary. Any conversation that started with that tone never ended well in our family. Plus, the fact that Tiffany was present for what should have been a family discussion felt intrusive and inappropriate. "The thing is," Dad continued, swirling his whiskey, "I've been looking at the numbers, and this MIT thing just isn't practical. That school costs what, $60,000 a year?" Even with your partial scholarship, we're talking about a huge financial burden. And for what? A computer degree? I've got it covered, I replied carefully, trying to keep my voice steady. Between my savings, the scholarship, and student loans, I can make it work. Marcus leaned back in his chair, already slightly drunk. Dude, you'll be in debt for like 20 years. Is that really worth it for some computer degree you could get anywhere? Portland State has a computer science program. Community college has programming classes. Why go into massive debt when there are cheaper options right here? It's MIT, I said simply. It's not just some computer degree. It's one of the most prestigious technology programs in the world. The networking opportunities alone are worth the investment. Tiffany spoke up, her voice syrupy sweet with fake concern. Honey, your dad and I have been talking, and we think there's a much better opportunity for you right here in Portland. Something that could set you up for life without all that debt and uncertainty. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. What kind of opportunity? Dad leaned forward, his eyes bright with whiskey and what he probably thought was fatherly wisdom. I'm expanding the construction business, adding a technology component for project management, digital blueprints, automated scheduling, that kind of thing. You're good with computers, obviously. You could head up that whole division. Start immediately after graduation with a real salary, not some unpaid internship garbage college kids usually get. Learn the business from the ground up, Marcus added enthusiastically. By the time you're 30, you could be running the whole company. Harrison & Sons could become Harrison & Sons & Son. Think about the legacy, man. I stared at them, trying to process what I was hearing. The audacity was breathtaking. Here was Dad, who'd literally told me that hiding behind computers wasn't manly, now wanting to exploit my technical skills for his business. You want me to give up MIT to work for the family business? It's not giving up anything, Dad insisted. It's choosing practical success over academic fantasies. How many computer science graduates end up working dead-end jobs anyway? I read an article that said 70% of tech workers are unemployed within 5 years of graduation. This way, you're guaranteed a future. You'd start at $40,000 a year, plus benefits, plus profit sharing. Show me a college graduate who gets that kind of offer right out of school. A future working for you, I pointed out. What's wrong with that? Marcus demanded, his voice getting louder. Most kids would kill for this opportunity. Dad's handing you a career on a silver platter, and you're acting like it's some kind of insult. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm despite the absurdity of the situation. I appreciate the offer, but I've worked toward MIT for years. This is my dream, my path. I've already been accepted. I've already received scholarships. I've already planned my entire future around this opportunity. Tiffany exchanged a meaningful look with Dad. Sweetie, dreams don't pay bills. Your father is offering you something real and substantial, something you can build a family on someday. College is just 4 years of partying and theoretical nonsense. This is a chance to start building real wealth immediately. MIT is real, I replied firmly, and substantial. It's one of the best computer science programs in the world. The connections I'll make there, the education I'll receive, it's worth far more than any entry-level position at a construction company. Dad's expression began to harden. Jordan, I'm trying to be generous here, but you need to understand something. If you choose this college fantasy over family, over a guaranteed career, over everything I'm offering, you're on your own. Completely. No financial help, no safety net, no coming home when things get tough. The ultimatum hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Marcus nodded approvingly, clearly having been part of this conversation before I arrived. Tiffany sipped her wine and watched me with calculating eyes, probably already mentally redecorating my bedroom for her future event planning office. So you're saying if I go to MIT, you'll disown me? I asked, my voice barely steady. I'm saying actions have consequences, Dad replied coldly. Family loyalty matters. If you can't see that this business opportunity is better than racking up debt for some fancy degree that might not even get you a job, then maybe you're not as smart as everyone thinks you are. Something inside me snapped. Years of feeling second best, of watching Marcus get everything handed to him while I worked for every opportunity, of being treated like my achievements didn't matter, crystallized into pure determination. Then I guess I'm on my own, I said, standing up from the table. The shocked silence told me they hadn't expected this response. They'd assumed I'd fold, accept their offer, and fall in line like I always had. Dad's face went from confident to confused to angry in the span of about 3 seconds. Don't be dramatic, Marcus scoffed, but his voice lacked conviction. Where would you even live? What would you do for money? I'm not being dramatic, I replied, surprising myself with how calm I sounded. I'm making a choice, the same choice you're making. Dad's face flushed red. Fine, if that's your attitude, if that's how little you value family and opportunity, then pack your things. You've got until Sunday to find somewhere else to live. And don't come crawling back when reality hits and you're sleeping in some dorm room eating ramen noodles while your classmates' parents pay for their education. I nodded, already mentally calculating my options. I'll be out tomorrow. Tomorrow? Tiffany looked surprised. Don't you want to think about this? Sleep on it? This is a big decision, honey. I've been thinking about it for years, I replied. Every time I watched Marcus get things I worked twice as hard for. Every time my achievements were dismissed or ignored. Every time family loyalty was demanded from me but never shown to me. I've been preparing for this moment without realizing it. The next morning, I loaded everything I owned into my beat-up Honda Civic. Clothes, computer equipment, textbooks, the tools Frank had given me as a graduation gift, and the $12,000 I'd saved working at Technofix. Mom cried when I told her what happened, but she was barely keeping her own life together and couldn't offer practical help. The house was still in foreclosure, and she was dealing with her own financial crisis. "I'm so sorry, Jordan," she sobbed, holding me tight in the driveway. I had no idea William was planning this. I thought he'd grown up, but he's still the same selfish man who hid money during our divorce. I assured her I'd be fine and that this wasn't about her. I hugged her goodbye, promised to stay in touch, and drove away from the only home I'd ever known with absolutely no idea where I'd sleep that night. My first week of independence was terrifying. I slept in my car in the parking lot of a 24-hour Walmart, showering at a gym where I'd bought a month-to-month membership using my employee discount from Technofix. During the day, I worked double shifts at the repair shop, picking up every available hour to build my cash reserve. Frank, sensing something was wrong, but too polite to pry, offered me extra projects and even let me sleep in the shop's back room a couple of nights when the weather was particularly bad. The breakthrough came when Mrs. Chen, my AP computer science teacher, found out about my situation. She'd called the house to congratulate me on my graduation speech and spoke to Mom, who broke down crying and told her everything. Mrs. Chen immediately offered a solution. Her neighbor was spending the summer in Europe, and she needed someone responsible to house sit, maintain the property, and collect mail. In exchange for these simple tasks, I'd have a place to live for 3 months, long enough to get established and figure out my next moves. The house was a modest 2-bedroom bungalow in southeast Portland, nothing fancy but clean and comfortable. More importantly, it had reliable internet and a quiet space where I could work on programming projects. I threw myself into preparation for MIT with an intensity that bordered on obsession. I took online courses to get ahead in the curriculum, freelanced web development projects to build both my portfolio and bank account, and worked at Technofix whenever Frank needed extra help. Sleep became optional. Success became mandatory. During this period, I also refined BuildTrack significantly. What had started as a hobby project evolved into a sophisticated application with genuine commercial potential. I reached out to several small contractors through Frank's network and offered free trials of the software in exchange for feedback. The response was overwhelmingly positive. These business owners were dealing with the exact problems BuildTrack was designed to solve: inefficient scheduling, poor communication, budget overruns, and endless paperwork. MIT was everything I dreamed and more challenging than I'd imagined. The coursework was brutal, the competition fierce, and the financial pressure constant. I worked multiple jobs to stay afloat, tutoring underclassmen in programming, maintaining the university's computer labs during overnight shifts, and taking freelance projects that kept me up until dawn. My social life was non-existent, but I didn't care. Every sacrifice brought me closer to my goals. The other students came from privileged backgrounds I could barely comprehend. My roommate, Christopher Vanderbilt, yes, from those Vanderbilts, casually mentioned during orientation that his family's summer house in the Hamptons had more bathrooms than my childhood home had rooms. While classmates complained about their parents only giving them $2,000 per month for miscellaneous expenses, I was calculating whether I could afford both lunch and dinner, or if I'd need to choose one. But I had something many of my privileged classmates lacked: hunger. Real, desperate hunger for success. They were at MIT because their families expected it. I was there because I'd sacrificed everything to get there. That difference showed in my work ethic, my grades, and ultimately in my achievements. During my sophomore year, I started developing BuildTrack more seriously. What had begun as a high school project was evolving into something with real commercial potential. Initially, BuildTrack was just a class project for my software engineering course, but when I demonstrated it to my professor, Dr. Sarah Chen, no relation to my high school teacher, she was impressed enough to suggest I enter it in MIT's annual entrepreneurship competition. Working with Dr. Chen's mentorship, I refined the concept extensively. I conducted market research, interviewed dozens of contractors about their pain points, and developed a comprehensive business plan that addressed everything from user acquisition to revenue projections. The app's core functionality remained the same: project management tools specifically designed for construction companies. But I added features like GPS tracking for equipment, automated time clock systems, integration with accounting software, and even weather alerts that could automatically adjust project schedules. BuildTrack won second place in the MIT entrepreneurship competition, earning me a $15,000 prize and, more importantly, the attention of several venture capital firms. One partner, Elena Rodriguez from Cascade Ventures, saw the app's potential and offered to mentor me through the development process. Elena was exactly what I needed at that moment in my life. A successful entrepreneur who understood both the technical and business sides of building a company. She was 43 years old, had built and sold 2 companies of her own, and had a reputation for identifying promising early-stage startups. More importantly, she believed in BuildTrack's potential when others were skeptical. The construction industry is notoriously slow to adopt new technology, Elena explained during our first formal meeting at Cascade Ventures offices in downtown Boston. But the companies that do embrace digital tools gain huge competitive advantages. Your app addresses real pain points that contractors face every day: scheduling conflicts, budget overruns, communication gaps, and compliance headaches. Plus, you understand the industry better than most tech entrepreneurs because you grew up around it. With Elena's guidance, I spent my junior year turning BuildTrack from a class project into a market-ready product. I formed an LLC, hired 2 fellow students as part-time developers, and began beta testing with small construction companies around Boston. The feedback was overwhelmingly positive. Contractors loved the intuitive interface, the mobile-first design, and the way BuildTrack integrated with tools they were already using. The beta testing phase revealed insights I never would have discovered without real-world usage. Contractors needed features I hadn't considered: integration with popular estimating software, automated generation of progress photos for client updates, and tools for managing subcontractor relationships. They also wanted industry-specific templates for different types of projects. Residential remodels required different tracking than commercial builds or infrastructure projects. By senior year, BuildTrack had evolved into a comprehensive platform with over 50 features. We had paying customers generating real revenue, and I'd hired my first full-time employee, Jessica Wu, a brilliant UI/UX designer who'd graduated the year before and was working at a larger tech company, but was eager to join a startup with growth potential. We worked out of a cramped shared office space in Cambridge, surviving on takeout and caffeine while refining the product based on customer feedback. Jessica brought skills I desperately needed. While I was strong at back-end development and business logic, she excelled at creating user interfaces that were both beautiful and intuitive. More importantly, she understood how to design software for people who weren't technically sophisticated. Construction workers needed tools that worked perfectly on phones with cracked screens, in bright sunlight, while wearing work gloves. Jessica redesigned BuildTrack's interface to meet those real-world requirements. The growth during this period was steady, but not explosive. We acquired customers primarily through word-of-mouth referrals and by attending construction industry trade shows, where I demonstrate BuildTrack to skeptical contractors who gradually became believers. Revenue grew from a few $100s per month to several thousand, then to over $10,000 by the time I graduated. Graduation day was bittersweet. I walked across that stage knowing I'd achieved everything I dreamed of, but with no family there to witness it. Mom sent a card with a $100 bill inside, apologizing that she couldn't afford to travel to Boston. She was still struggling financially, still dealing with the aftermath of Dad's financial deceptions. I spent graduation night alone in my apartment, video chatting with Jessica about our expansion plans, and trying not to think about the empty seats where my family should have been. The summer after graduation marked a turning point for BuildTrack. Elena introduced me to a group of angel investors who were interested in supporting early-stage tech companies led by promising young entrepreneurs. After months of presentations, due diligence meetings, and negotiations, we secured $500,000 in seed funding to scale BuildTrack nationwide. The infusion of capital allowed us to hire our first sales team, expand our development capabilities, and invest in marketing efforts that could reach contractors beyond the Northeast. We moved into a proper office space, hired experienced developers, and began building the infrastructure necessary to support hundreds or eventually thousands of users simultaneously. The growth that followed was explosive. Within 18 months of receiving our seed funding, we had over 3,000 contractors using BuildTrack across 15 states. The app's success led to speaking engagements at industry conferences, features in construction trade publications, and inquiries from larger companies about licensing our technology or acquiring the company entirely. During this growth period, I occasionally thought about my family, but rarely reached out. The complete silence from Dad and Marcus felt appropriate. They'd made their choice, and I'd made mine. I focused instead on building my company and creating the success I'd always believed was possible. But success brought new challenges I hadn't anticipated. Managing a growing team required leadership skills I was still developing. Scaling technology to handle thousands of users presented engineering problems more complex than anything I'd learned in school. Most difficult of all, I had to learn how to delegate responsibilities and trust other people to execute critical parts of the business. The real validation came during my third year post-graduation, when Home Improvement Network, a national franchise with over 2,000 contractor locations, approached us about acquiring BuildTrack. Cheyenne had been watching our growth and realized that our technology could give their franchisees a significant competitive advantage. The initial conversations were exploratory, but they quickly became serious negotiations. The offer was substantial, $1.2 million for the company, plus a 3-year consulting contract worth an additional $400,000, plus equity in Hen that could be worth millions more if their expansion plans succeeded. More importantly, Hen wanted me to stay on as CTO and head of product development, essentially giving me unlimited resources to continue innovating in the construction tech space. I accepted the offer after weeks of careful consideration and consultation with Elena and my attorney. It wasn't just about the money, though the financial security was incredible. AN had the resources to take BuildTrack to markets I could never reach on my own: international expansion, integration with major enterprise software systems, and development of new products that addressed broader industry needs. The acquisition closed on a Friday afternoon in November, exactly 6 years and 5 months after Dad had thrown me out of the house. That weekend, I bought a sleek downtown loft with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the Willamette River, traded my college Honda Civic for a Tesla Model S, and, for the first time since leaving home, allowed myself to feel truly, completely successful. It was Elena who suggested hosting a launch party to celebrate both the acquisition and my new role at Cheyenne. "You've accomplished something remarkable," she insisted over dinner at Portland's most exclusive restaurant. "Let people know about your success. Network with other entrepreneurs. Celebrate your achievements. And maybe inspire others who might be where you were 6 years ago." I rented the event space on the top floor of Portland's newest high-rise, hired the city's most sought-after catering company, and invited everyone who'd supported my journey. Professors from MIT, fellow entrepreneurs I'd met through industry events, hit-in executives, venture capital contacts, and local business leaders who'd been following BuildTrack's progress. The guest list included over 150 people, representing the professional network I'd built entirely on my own. On impulse, I also sent invitations to my family. I told myself it was about closure rather than validation. But deep down, I wanted them to see what I'd accomplished without their support. I wanted them to understand the magnitude of what they'd walked away from when they chose to abandon me. Mom called immediately after receiving her invitation, crying and apologizing and promising to attend. "I'm so proud of you, Jordan," she kept repeating through her tears. "I always knew you'd do something amazing. I just wish I could have been more supportive when you needed it most." Dad's response came through Marcus, a text saying they'd try to make it if their schedules permitted. The casual dismissal stung more than I expected, but I pushed the hurt aside. This party was about celebrating my success and networking with people who mattered for my future, not seeking approval from people who'd forfeited their right to have opinions about my life. The night of the party was perfect in every way that mattered. The venue looked spectacular, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of Portland's skyline and Mount Hood in the distance. Industry leaders mingled with young entrepreneurs, professors shared stories about innovative student projects, and Cheyenne executives talked excitedly about expanding BuildTrack's capabilities into new markets and possibly developing additional products for other industries. I wore my best suit, a custom-tailored piece I'd bought specifically for this occasion, and felt more confident than I ever had in my life. This wasn't just a party. It was a declaration. I'd built something significant, something that mattered, something that was entirely mine. I was in the middle of a conversation with a reporter from TechCrunch about the future of construction technology when I saw them enter. Dad looked exactly the same, maybe with more gray at his temples and a few more lines around his eyes, wearing an expensive suit that screamed, "Look how successful I am." Marcus had put on considerable weight and lost most of his hair, but still carried himself with that familiar swagger that had intimidated me as a child. Tiffany clung to Dad's arm like a status accessory, her outfit more appropriate for a nightclub than a professional networking event. They surveyed the room like wolves evaluating prey, taking in the success surrounding them with calculating eyes that missed nothing. I could practically see them doing mental calculations about the cost of the venue, the catering, the champagne being served, and most importantly, what my newfound wealth might mean for them. I excused myself from the reporter and approached them, my stomach knotting with familiar anxiety despite my professional confidence. 6 years of independence hadn't completely erased the psychological impact of their rejection. "Dad, Marcus, Tiffany," I greeted them politely, extending my hand for handshakes that were firm but not warm. "Thank you for coming." Dad looked around the room with obvious approval, taking in the high-end finishes, the professional crowd, and the servers circulating with expensive appetizers. "Impressive setup, Jordan. This must have cost a fortune." The company covered it, I replied neutrally. It's a celebration of the acquisition and a networking opportunity for future business development. Right, the acquisition, Marcus said, his tone suggesting he didn't quite believe the numbers were real. So you actually sold that little app for over $1 million? BuildTrack, yes. $1.2 million plus additional compensation and equity in the acquiring company. Tiffany's eyes widened dramatically. That's real money. Like you could buy a house money. It's a good start, I agreed modestly, though internally I was annoyed by their surprise. Had they really expected me to fail so completely? Dad clapped me on the shoulder, the first physical contact we'd had in over 6 years. I have to admit, I didn't think this computer thing would amount to much when you were younger. But look at you now, millionaire at 25. That's genuinely impressive. I waited for the inevitable but, or the backhanded compliment that would somehow diminish my achievement. It came quickly. Of course, Dad continued, his voice taking on that familiar manipulative tone. Success like this comes with responsibilities. Family responsibilities. There it was. I kept my expression carefully neutral. What kind of responsibilities? Marcus stepped closer, his voice taking on that persuasive tone I remembered from childhood arguments. The thing is, bro, family should stick together, especially when one of us makes it big. Now that you've got real money, it's time to think about how we can all benefit from your success. Benefit how, exactly? I asked, though I already knew where this conversation was heading. Dad glanced around to make sure no one was listening, then leaned in conspiratorially. My construction business has been struggling since the recession hit the industry. $1 million investment could turn Harrison & Sons around completely. Think of it as a family partnership. Your tech expertise and capital combined with my decades of industry experience. You want me to invest in your company, I clarified. It's a sure thing, Marcus insisted with the confidence of someone who'd never actually built anything. Dad's got connections throughout Oregon and Washington. With your money behind us, we could expand into California, maybe even go national. We've already researched the market opportunities. The Tiffany nodded eagerly, jumping into the sales pitch. We've already looked at properties for a new headquarters. There's this beautiful space in Beaverton that would be perfect for a regional operation. And I've been developing business plans for expansion into event management and high-end residential projects. I felt that familiar sensation of being manipulated, pressured to sacrifice my interests for the family's benefit. But this time was fundamentally different. This time, I had power, resources, and 6 years of independence that had taught me to recognize manipulation for what it was. That's an interesting proposal, I said carefully, buying myself time to think. But any investment of that magnitude would require comprehensive due diligence. I'd need to see detailed financial statements, business plans, market analysis, competitive assessments, the same documentation any serious investor would require. Dad's confident smile faltered slightly. Come on, Jordan. We're family. You don't need to treat this like some corporate transaction with lawyers and accountants. Actually, I do, I replied firmly, especially because we're family. Mixing business and personal relationships requires clear expectations, proper documentation, and professional oversight. Marcus looked frustrated, probably having expected me to write a check on the spot. You're overthinking this, man. We're not asking for handouts. We're offering you an opportunity to get in on the ground floor of something big. Family business, generational wealth, legacy building. Before I could formulate a response, Alina approached our group. As an experienced venture capitalist, she had radar for tense situations and had clearly noticed the shift in my body language from across the room. Jordan, there's someone I'd like you to meet, she said smoothly, placing a protective hand on my arm. The VP of Product Development from Microsoft is here, and she's very interested in BuildTrack's scalability architecture. I gratefully accepted the interruption. Dad, Marcus, Tiffany, this is Elena Rodriguez from Cascade Ventures, my mentor and primary investor. Alina, this is my family. Elena shook hands with polite professionalism, but I could tell she was assessing the situation with the shrewd eye of someone who'd encountered every type of family drama that sudden wealth could create. Her smile was warm, but her eyes were calculating. Congratulations on Jordan's remarkable success, she said diplomatically. BuildTrack is truly revolutionary in the construction tech space. Jordan's vision and execution have been exceptional throughout the entire development process. We always knew he was special, Dad said proudly, as though he'd been supportive and encouraging all along. Smart kid, always working with computers. We're very proud of what he's accomplished. Elena's smile was polite, but I caught the slight skeptical raise of her eyebrow. It takes tremendous courage to pursue ambitious entrepreneurial goals without family support. Jordan's independence and determination are what made this success possible. Not everyone has the strength to build something from nothing. The implied criticism hung in the air like smoke. Dad's face reddened slightly, but before he could formulate a response, Elena had smoothly guided me away toward the Microsoft executive who was indeed waiting to speak with me. Family trouble? She asked quietly as we walked across the crowded room. Something like that, I murmured. They want me to invest $1 million in Dad's failing construction business. No due diligence, no documentation, just hand over the money because we share DNA. Elena nodded knowingly. Sudden wealth attracts all kinds of proposals, especially from people who feel entitled to it based on biology rather than merit. Trust your instincts and stick to your principles. The people who truly love you will support your success without trying to exploit it. The conversation with the Microsoft VP, Dr. Amanda Chen, was engaging and productive. She was interested in potentially licensing BuildTrack's core architecture for Microsoft's own construction industry initiatives. We discussed integration possibilities, scalability challenges, and the potential for BuildTrack to become part of a larger enterprise software ecosystem. It was exactly the kind of high-level business conversation that validated everything I'd worked toward. But I couldn't help glancing across the room periodically, where my family had clustered near the bar, clearly discussing strategy. Their body language suggested growing frustration with my lack of immediate compliance with their investment demands. Marcus was gesticulating animatedly, while Tiffany nodded along, and Dad's expression was growing darker by the minute. An hour later, as the party was beginning to wind down and some guests were starting to leave, they cornered me again near the exit, clearly having planned this final confrontation. "We've been talking," Marcus announced, his tone more aggressive than it had been earlier. "And we think you're making a serious mistake by being so formal and cold about this family investment opportunity." "It's not about being formal," I replied calmly. "It's about being smart with money I worked incredibly hard to earn. I've learned not to make emotional decisions about financial matters." Dad's mask of fatherly pride slipped completely, revealing the entitled anger underneath. "Risk everything? We're talking about investing in family, not some stranger's business. After everything we've been through, after all the years of separation, don't you think you owe us something?" "Owe you something?" The words came out harsher than I intended, causing several nearby guests to look in our direction with obvious curiosity. "6 years ago, you threw me out of the house for choosing college over your business," I continued, lowering my voice, but not my intensity. "You cut off all support, all contact, all relationship. You made it clear that I was on my own. Now that I've succeeded on my own, you want to claim family loyalty?" Tiffany stepped forward, her voice taking on a pleading, almost whining tone. "Jordan, honey, we understand you're hurt about the past, but holding grudges doesn't help anyone. Your father was trying to protect you from making an expensive mistake. College debt ruins people's lives." Protect me? I almost laughed at the absurdity. By threatening to disown me if I didn't give up my dreams? "You were 19, Dad said defensively, as if my age had somehow justified abandoning me. "You didn't understand the real world. You had these unrealistic ideas about college and career success. I was trying to give you a practical alternative that would have kept you close to family." "You were trying to control me," I corrected firmly. "The same way you're trying to control me now with emotional manipulation and guilt tactics." Marcus's face flushed red with anger and probably embarrassment at the public nature of this confrontation. "Nobody's manipulating anyone. We're offering you a legitimate business opportunity. If you're too selfish and arrogant to help your own family after everything we've been through, just say so." The accusation of selfishness hit exactly the nerve they intended, triggering years of psychological conditioning to put family needs before my own interests. But this time, instead of capitulating like I might have as a teenager, I felt a surge of clarity and determination. "You're absolutely right," I said calmly, my voice steady despite the emotional intensity of the moment. "I am being selfish. I'm choosing my own financial security and business principles over your sense of entitlement to money you didn't earn." I pulled out my phone and opened a document I'd prepared years earlier, just in case this confrontation ever materialized. I'd hoped it would never be necessary, but I'd learned to prepare for worst-case scenarios. "Since we're talking about family history and obligations," I continued, "let me share something interesting I discovered during the background check required for the acquisition." I projected the document onto my phone screen so they could see it clearly. It was a detailed financial report showing assets, transactions, and legal documents that painted a very different picture of our family's financial situation than what I'd been told as a teenager. "This is from a private investigator I hired 2 years ago," I explained, watching their expressions change from confident to confused to genuinely alarmed. "I wanted to understand exactly what happened during your divorce from Mom and why she struggled so much financially afterward." Dad's face went pale as he recognized some of the document headings. "Where did you get this? How did you?" "It turns out you didn't lose everything to gambling like you claimed during the divorce," I continued, reading directly from the investigative report. "You hid over $300,000 in offshore accounts, cryptocurrency investments, and shell company assets. While Mom worked 3 jobs to avoid foreclosure on our house, you were living comfortably on hidden wealth." Marcus stared at the document, clearly seeing this information for the first time. "Dad, is this true? You told us the gambling wiped out everything." It's more complicated than it looks, Dad said weakly, his confident demeanor crumbling. There were business considerations, tax implications. Actually, it's quite simple, I interrupted, swiping to the next page of the report. You committed fraud during the divorce proceedings by concealing marital assets. You let Mom believe she was getting half of nothing when she was actually entitled to half of a substantial portfolio. Tiffany grabbed Dad's arm, her voice rising with panic. William, what is he talking about? You told me all your money came from the business recovery after the divorce. I swiped to another document, this one even more damaging. This is even more interesting. 3 years ago, Dad took out a $50,000 loan using Marcus as a co-signer. The loan application stated it was for business equipment purchases, but the money was actually used to cover gambling debts that never stopped accumulating. Marcus looked stunned, his mouth opening and closing without sound. You said that loan was for the new excavator. You showed me purchase orders and everything. Fake documentation, I confirmed, showing another page of the investigative report. The money went directly to various casinos in Nevada and to tribal gaming establishments in Washington. Marcus, you're still legally responsible for that debt, which is why your credit score has been steadily declining over the past 3 years. The three of them stared at the evidence in shocked silence. Other party guests had begun to notice the escalating tension and were either moving closer to eavesdrop or heading toward the exits to avoid the obvious family drama. So when you talk about family loyalty and responsibility, I said, putting my phone away after making sure they'd seen enough, remember that loyalty runs both ways. You abandoned me when I needed support, defrauded Mom during the divorce, and manipulated Marcus into co-signing loans for your continuing gambling addiction. Dad found his voice, though it shook with a combination of anger and desperation. You hired a private investigator to spy on your own family? What kind of person does that? I hired a professional to uncover the truth, I corrected without apology. Because I've learned that people who demand trust while refusing accountability usually have significant things to hide. Elena appeared at my side again, having noticed the escalating confrontation from across the room. Several other guests were watching now, and she clearly felt the situation needed professional management. Is everything all right here? She asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. Actually, yes, I replied, maintaining my composure despite the emotional intensity. We were just finishing our conversation about family business matters. Marcus looked back and forth between the evidence on my phone and Dad, pieces of a puzzle finally clicking into place after years of confusion. All those times you needed emergency money for business expenses. How much of our family's financial problems were actually caused by gambling? Dad couldn't meet his eyes. Marcus, it's not what you think. Business is complicated. There were cash flow issues. It's exactly what I think, Marcus replied, his voice heavy with the realization that he'd been manipulated for years. Just like when I was a kid and money kept disappearing from Mom's purse, but you always had explanations. The recognition in Marcus's voice told me he was finally seeing patterns of behavior that had been normalized throughout our childhood. Family dysfunction has a way of making obviously problematic behavior seem acceptable when it's all you've ever known. I think, Elena said diplomatically but firmly, this might be a good time to let Jordan enjoy the rest of his celebration. These seem like private family matters that would be better discussed elsewhere. Dad straightened his shoulders, trying to recover some dignity and control over a situation that had completely escaped his management. Fine, but don't think this is over, Jordan. Family relationships can't be dissolved as easily as business partnerships. You're absolutely right about that, I agreed calmly, which is why I dissolved our family relationship 6 years ago when you chose to disown me rather than support my education. Tonight was just making sure we all understand that decision was permanent and non-negotiable. As they walked toward the exit, I could hear Tiffany whispering urgently to Dad about the legal implications of the financial revelations, while Marcus lagged behind. Looking back at me with an expression I couldn't quite interpret, part anger, part confusion, and maybe, just maybe, a hint of grudging respect for my independence. After they left, Elena handed me a fresh glass of champagne. That looked incredibly intense. Are you okay? I took a sip, surprised to find my hands weren't shaking despite the confrontation. Better than okay. For the first time in my life, I stood up to them completely, without backing down or compromising my principles. Good for you, she said firmly. Toxic family relationships can destroy even the most successful people if they don't establish and maintain clear boundaries. You handled that with remarkable maturity. The rest of the party passed in a blur of congratulations, business card exchanges, and productive conversations. Several other investors expressed interest in my next ventures. The Microsoft VP scheduled a follow-up meeting to discuss potential partnerships, and I made valuable connections with other entrepreneurs who were building companies in adjacent industries. By the time the last guest left, I felt energized rather than drained by the evening's events. The next morning brought a series of text messages from Marcus asking if we could meet privately to discuss what had been revealed the night before. Against my better judgment and Elena's advice, I agreed to coffee at a neutral location downtown, curious about whether he might be capable of the kind of self-reflection that genuine relationship repair would require. Marcus arrived looking haggard, like he hadn't slept at all. His usually confident demeanor was replaced by something I'd never seen before: genuine uncertainty and what might have been humility. "I need to understand what happened last night," he said without preamble, diving straight into the difficult conversation. "That stuff about Dad's gambling, the hidden assets, the loan fraud, how long have you known about all of this?" "I suspected something was wrong during the divorce," I replied honestly. Mom's financial situation never made sense if Dad had really lost everything. But I only had it professionally investigated after I became successful enough to afford that kind of comprehensive research. He nodded slowly, processing this information. "I always wondered why Mom struggled so much when Dad seemed to recover and thrive so quickly. I thought she was just bad with money management, or maybe hiding assets herself. Dad was very careful to control the narrative," I observed. "He made sure you saw him as the victim of Mom's unreasonable demands, rather than understanding him as the perpetrator of financial fraud." Marcus stared into his coffee cup, clearly struggling with the realization that his entire understanding of our family dynamics had been based on lies. "He played us against each other, didn't he? Made me think you were selfish and ungrateful for choosing college. Made you think I was the spoiled favorite who got everything handed to him." "Divide and conquer," I agreed. "Classic manipulation technique. Keep your targets competing for limited approval so they don't unite against the actual problem." "That loan you mentioned last night," Marcus said quietly. "I'm really legally responsible for $50,000 of gambling debt?" I nodded. "Unless you can prove in court that you didn't understand what you were signing, which would be difficult to establish given your business education and the fact that you're not a minor." Marcus laughed bitterly, but there was no humor in it. "Business degree that Dad paid for, and now I know where that tuition money actually came from." We sat in uncomfortable silence for several minutes, each processing the implications of our family's deeper dysfunction. I could see him working through years of memories, reinterpreting events through this new lens of understanding. "I owe you a massive apology," Marcus said finally, his voice heavy with genuine remorse. "A bigger apology than I probably know how to give. I went along with throwing you out because I believed Dad's version of events completely. I thought you were being ungrateful and stubborn about a generous offer." "You were 22, I replied, echoing Dad's earlier excuse about my age. "And Dad was very convincing when he wanted to be." "That's not an excuse," Marcus insisted, showing more moral clarity than I'd expected. "I should have supported my little brother instead of ganging up on you. I should have questioned why Dad was so threatened by your academic success." The apology felt genuine, but I'd learned to be extremely cautious about accepting family reconciliation at face value. People can say the right words without being willing to do the hard work of actual change. "I appreciate you saying that," I said carefully. "But words are easier than actions, and trust has to be rebuilt slowly over time. If you want to have any kind of relationship going forward, it has to be based on who we are now, not nostalgia for who we used to be." Marcus nodded, accepting this boundary without argument. "I understand completely, and I understand if you can never forgive me. But I want you to know that seeing what you've accomplished, seeing how strong and successful you've become despite everything, I'm genuinely proud to be your brother, even if I don't deserve that relationship." That simple statement hit me harder than I expected. Despite everything that had happened, despite years of resentment and hurt, some part of me had always wanted my big brother's approval and respect. "What are you going to do about the loan situation?" I asked, changing the subject before I got too emotional. "Talk to a lawyer, I guess. See what my options are." He paused. "I don't suppose you'd consider helping me financially with—" "No," I interrupted firmly but not unkindly. "I won't pay your debt or Dad's debt, but I'll connect you with a good attorney who specializes in financial fraud cases. You might have grounds to contest the loan if you can prove Dad misrepresented its purpose with falsified documentation." Marcus accepted this boundary without argument, which surprised me given his history of pushing for what he wanted. That's more help than I deserve, honestly. Over the following months, Marcus did consult with the attorney I recommended and successfully challenged the loan based on fraudulent documentation and misrepresentation. Dad was forced to assume full responsibility for the debt, which effectively ended his relationship with both of his sons and created serious legal problems that occupied his attention for the next several years. The legal proceedings revealed even more disturbing information about Dad's financial behavior. The private investigator's report had only scratched the surface. Dad had been systematically defrauding business partners, hiding income from the IRS, and using various shell companies to launder money through legitimate construction projects. The scope of his illegal activities was staggering. Mom reached out sporadically during this period, usually around holidays or my birthday, expressing pride in my success and regret about our fractured family. I maintained polite but distant contact, sending occasional updates about my career, but avoiding deeper emotional connection. The wounds were too deep, and her role in the family dysfunction too significant for easy reconciliation, though I harbored less resentment toward her than toward Dad and Marcus. The most unexpected development was my gradually evolving relationship with Marcus. Without Dad's toxic influence poisoning every interaction, we began building something that resembled a genuine adult friendship based on mutual respect rather than family obligation. Marcus eventually found stable work as a project manager for a mid-sized construction firm, ironically using some of the organizational principles I developed for BuildTrack. A year after the launch party, I started my second company, focused on developing artificial intelligence-powered tools for small businesses across multiple industries. The venture capital community welcomed me enthusiastically, and BuildTrack's success had established my reputation as someone who could identify underserved markets and develop innovative solutions that addressed real business problems. The new company, which I called SmartOps, used machine learning to help small businesses optimize everything from inventory management to employee scheduling to customer service. It was more ambitious than BuildTrack, requiring larger initial investments and a bigger team, but the potential market was exponentially larger. Elena remained involved as both an advisor and investor, and I continued learning from her experience navigating the challenges of rapid business growth. She introduced me to other successful entrepreneurs who became mentors in different aspects of business development, from scaling company culture to managing investor relationships to preparing for eventual acquisition or public offering. As I worked late one evening in my new office, a full floor of a downtown Portland high-rise, I received an unexpected email from my old high school computer science teacher, Mrs. Chen. She'd seen news of my latest venture in the Portland Business Journal and wanted to congratulate me on my continued success. At the bottom of her message was a line that made me smile. I always knew you'd figure out how to turn that stubborn independence into your greatest strength. Your parents may not understand what you've accomplished, but those of us who watched you grow up aren't surprised at all. Looking back on that night at the launch party, I realized it wasn't really about proving anything to my family or getting revenge for past wrongs. It was about finally, completely choosing myself over their expectations and manipulation. The scared 19-year-old sleeping in his car had grown into someone who could stand firm in his principles, even when that stance made others deeply uncomfortable. Family relationships don't always heal, despite what movies and motivational speeches suggest. Sometimes the healthiest choice is accepting that some people, even parents and siblings, aren't capable of the growth and self-reflection necessary for authentic connection. But chosen family, mentors like Alina, friends like Jessica, business partners who share your values, even reconciled relationships like the one slowly developing with Marcus, can provide the support and belonging that biology failed to deliver. 3 years after the launch party, SmartOps was acquired by a Fortune 500 company for $15 million, making me wealthy beyond anything I'd imagined as a teenager working at Technofix. Today, I serve as the VP of Innovation for the acquiring company, while also angel investing in other entrepreneurs who remind me of my younger self, brilliant, driven, and determined to succeed, regardless of the obstacles in their path. I own a beautiful house in the West Hills overlooking Portland, drive a car that starts reliably every morning, and sleep soundly knowing that my success belongs entirely to me. More importantly, I've learned that self-respect is absolutely non-negotiable. No amount of family pressure, emotional manipulation, or guilt tripping can force me to compromise my boundaries or my values. Most importantly, I've become the kind of person I needed when I was 19 and sleeping in my car. Someone who invests in potential, who believes in the power of education and hard work, and who understands that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the confidence to bet on themselves when no one else will. The 19-year-old who drove away from his family home with nothing but determination and a beat-up Honda Civic had everything he needed to build an extraordinary life. The courage to bet on himself when no one else would. The work ethic to turn dreams into reality, and the wisdom to know that sometimes the people who claim to love you the most are the ones who understand you the least. The investment that changed everything wasn't the venture capital that funded my first company or the acquisition that made me wealthy. It was the investment I made in myself, the night I chose MIT over family approval, independence over security, and my own dreams over their limited vision of what I could become.